Welcome to America 2025, Season 249. An endless drama where the script repeats every year. The American dream shatters, and today's Phoenix is one of the most heartbreaking episodes. Look around. Not high-rise buildings. It's not bright sunshine. But rather, it's the long rows of tents, like scars etched onto the city's face. The elderly trembled in the heat. The children fell asleep in the car seats. Families who once had homes are now crammed onto the sidewalks. Do you think this is just a scene from a movie? Number. This is the reality and future of anyone who stumbles just once off the safety net. In today's video, we'll talk about something the 6 p.m. news often avoids. Why Phoenix became a symbol of a wealthy nation's failure, and why any city could be the next episode. In your opinion, can a global superpower like the US truly be considered comprehensive when what we see here is a nation that can't even provide housing for its own people? They can launch spacecraft, dominate global markets, and pour billions into new technologies. But right on the ground, hundreds of thousands of people still live in tents amidst cities once hailed as symbols of prosperity. Phoenix is the embodiment of this ironic reality. According to a recent count, Maricopa County alone recorded over 9,700 homeless individuals, a record number, indicating that the situation shows no signs of improvement. But that statistic still doesn't fully reflect reality. Beyond downtown Phoenix, there are also invisible people. Some young people have to sleep in the suburbs of Chandler. Others are making do in makeshift homes in Yuma, and many families are spending the night in their cars along the routes in Flagstaff. These rarely documented slices make the already bleak picture even more painful. Back on the streets of Phoenix, the sidewalks seem to have become a battleground for survival. Under the bridge, beside the barrier, are rows of patched-up tents and old plastic tarpaulins battling the weather. A community outreach worker described it as another world, where people cling to each other to retain a last shred of dignity. Some people sat beside their carts containing all their belongings. Others tried to express their need for connection in public, a desperate attempt to feel cared for. Dignity, perhaps, is the thing that erodes the fastest. However, who truly chooses to be homeless? They were also people with jobs, dreams, and hopes for a normal life, just like everyone else. However, everything seemed to be overshadowed by the daily brutal struggle for survival. Every morning they wake up, not to pursue their dreams, but simply to find ways to overcome the heat, hunger, and insecurity. A young family forced to wander every place with their small child, tearfully shared. "We just wanted a peaceful roof over our heads so our child could sleep well, but that has become the most luxurious thing now." Many people recount that they feel they have no other choice. In their eyes, this life is like a cruel chess game where the board is already set and they are just pawns pushed forward, bearing the heaviest sacrifices. Looking at the financial figures, the impasse becomes even clearer. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix is $1,124 per month, while the average retirement income is only about $1,976 per month. That is, more than half of the pension had to be spent on rent, which is nearly double the safe threshold of 30%. And in reality, they couldn't possibly bring all the remaining money just to keep the roof over their heads. People still need to spend on food, medicine, utilities, transportation, and countless daily expenses. When it all adds up, a shortfall of nearly $1,400 per month becomes a chasm that is almost impossible to fill. For low-income workers, the situation is even more desperate. The minimum wage of $7.25 per hour has remained unchanged for over a decade. With that income level, over 60% of the salary goes toward rent, leaving too little for any other basic needs. Not having enough to eat or manage living expenses, emergencies become an even greater burden. And when the purse strings are tight, being thrown onto the streets with a tattered tent becomes an almost inevitable outcome. In an already fragile economic context, many people have no choice but to take on debt just to keep a roof over their heads. But when monthly income is already tight, paying interest becomes a burden beyond one's means. Not a few people found themselves drowning in debt within just a few months. They couldn't pay rent, interest kept ballooning, and eventually, both their homes and the little stability they had left were swept away. For them, borrowing money is no longer a solution, but has become the shortest path leading straight to the streets. Looking deeply into that reality, an unavoidable question arises. In the harshness of Phoenix, what dangers are lurking and what challenges are pressing down on the thousands of homeless people every hour, every minute? And can they survive in a city that's turning against itself? Many people are starting to call this year Groundhog Day 2025 because everything feels like it's stuck in a loop. And nothing exposes that painful cycle more clearly than homelessness. Year after year, they still have to witness hundreds of thousands of their fellow citizens sleeping in tents, on sidewalks, right in the middle of cities once considered symbols of prosperity. No matter how many promises are made, this vicious cycle seems never to be truly broken. And when you look closely at a map of the United States, Phoenix emerges as the most striking example of that cycle. Losing one's home is already a tragedy, but what awaits people on the streets is even more cruel. Safety risks, concerns about dignity, and the weight of social prejudice, all of which create a maze of uncertainty where surviving each day is a gamble. In the tent camps, insecurity is present on every square meter of land. The elderly have to sleep next to young, unruly people who often can't control their behavior. For an old man who has spent his life working, old age should have been a time of peace. But now it's filled with long, restless nights, fearing the loss of his meager possessions or an unexpected conflict. The image of an elderly man shivering under a thin blanket, lying close to young people collapsed on the sidewalk, has become a bitter testament. Old age in Phoenix no longer means safety. The laws and rights that are meant for all citizens are things they are not allowed to enjoy. A normal person who loses something will have the police file a report, insurance cover the loss, and the court protect them. But for the homeless, when their belongings are confiscated during a camp cleanup, they have no receipts to prove ownership, no insurance for reimbursement, and no lawyer to defend them. That distance is like two parallel worlds, one protected by law, the other considered non-existent. An elderly woman once told me that all her personal documents, from her ID card or driver's license to her medical records, were thrown away during a camp cleanup. As a result, she was unable to apply for benefits or access basic healthcare services. Losing an ID is like losing the right to exist within the system. You can't open an account, you can't apply for a job, you can't access benefits. For the homeless, that means they are pushed to the margins of society with no legal standing to start over. For women, the pain is even more excruciating. Not a few girls are pushed into toxic games just to make enough money to get by. However, instead of keeping that little money, many people are forced to hand it over to those in control or pay it immediately to survive. That cycle was like an invisible shackle, locking them in poverty. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And in Phoenix, this is no longer a slogan, but a reality on every street. But what was even more cruel was in the spirit. The homeless not only lose their homes, they also have to carry the burden of prejudice. Called street blight and considered dangerous to the community, they became a mirror reflecting the fears society wanted to avoid. They are treated like garbage that needs to be disposed of, when in reality, they are lives left behind by society. However, not everyone who finds themselves in this situation becomes terrible. Many people once had stable jobs, raised families, and contributed to their communities. They were simply caught in a chain of misfortune, gradually slipping out of the system's protective circle. That invisibility is more painful than anything. existing right in the heart of the city, yet being treated as a stain to be hidden, rather than a human being worthy of being seen and understood. The Phoenix sun, once a symbol of warmth, now felt like an invisible stone weighing down their souls. Homelessness, therefore, is not just about lacking a roof over one's head. It's like living in a maze of risks and prejudices, where every turn leads to uncertainty. And the heartbreaking question is, if even in a wealthy city like Phoenix, thousands of people are still suffering like this, what caused this crisis to erupt and persist to the point of being uncontrollable? Perhaps that's why many people say that living in Phoenix today is like being trapped in an endless loop, where each new day is just a painful copy of the last. The homelessness crisis in Phoenix is not the result of random incidents, but seems to stem from deep cracks in the economic structure and welfare system. When putting the pieces together, two main reasons why this city fell into an inescapable spiral become clear. The first reason lies in the growing gap between income and housing costs. The rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix has surpassed $1,100 per month, while the federal minimum wage has remained unchanged at $7.25 per hour for over a decade. For seniors who rely solely on a fixed pension, this figure becomes an almost unbearable burden. Just one rent increase is enough to push them out of stable housing. The housing market is also losing affordable options. Cheap homes are being replaced by luxury apartments, mobile homes are being bought up, and single-family homes are falling into the hands of investors. Deposit requirements and credit checks make it even more difficult for single women or the elderly to find housing. Once you fall out of the market, the path back is almost blocked, like trying to close an ever-widening blade. The second cause stems from the patchwork welfare system and the camp cleanup mentality instead of addressing the root causes. Policies prioritize cleaning the streets over creating sustainable housing. The homeless were displaced, their property confiscated, and their personal documents lost. For them, losing their ID or driver's license means being removed from the system. They can't apply for jobs, open bank accounts, or access support programs. Every time the camp is shut down, the journey to rebuild almost has to start from scratch. Additionally, the operational support system is heavily procedural and resource constrained. The elderly are easily discouraged by complicated procedures, while women face safety risks every time they are forced to relocate. When the law favors repression over protection, trust in the system gradually erodes. For many, they only feel like pawns on a predetermined chessboard, where the burden of sacrifice always falls on the weakest. The result is that the elderly give up and continue to live outdoors. Women are trapped in a vicious cycle of insecurity and dependence, and the city spends millions of dollars on cleanup, but very little on building sustainable solutions. The Phoenix painting therefore remained almost unchanged, like rewinding an old film. These two factors, income inequality and housing costs, along with a patchwork welfare system, are squeezing the lives of thousands of people. One side pushed them off the roof, while the other prevented them from returning. And when both exist together, Phoenix is prone to a Groundhog Day state, a desperate, repetitive loop with no visible exit. The homelessness crisis in Phoenix is not just a story of individuals losing their homes, but also has far-reaching effects on the entire community. As the number of homeless people increases, the ripple effects are becoming evident in the daily lives of the population. The initial impact falls on poor households and workers. Soaring rents are forcing many people who are already struggling to sacrifice basic needs. Young families have to cut back on food expenses, while the elderly have to choose between rent and medication. In many cases, when they can no longer make ends meet, they have to live in their cars or temporarily rely on friends. Small businesses and residential areas are also significantly affected. The shop owner complained that customers were hesitant to visit areas with many campsites, while local residents were worried about their family's safety. One side feels abandoned, while the other is caught up in the fear of losing control right in their own neighborhood. Social tension has been increasing ever since. The image of rows of tents on the sidewalks also directly impacts tourism, which is a major source of revenue for Phoenix. The city was once promoted as a resort destination, but now the image of instability makes many tourists hesitant. This led to a decline in revenue with a ripple effect throughout the local economy. The public service system is also overloaded. Hospitals have to accept many emergency cases from the streets, and police and social workers have to repeat the costly but ineffective cycle of camp relocation. The final expenditure came from taxpayers' money, sparking a wave of outrage within the community. Even non-profit organizations like Goodwill or discount retail chains like Walmart are reflecting the strain. More and more people are seeking assistance or only daring to buy the cheapest products, even leaving their shopping carts behind when they don't have enough money to pay. All of this shows that Phoenix is becoming a clear example of social breakdown. Homelessness is no longer just a problem for a single vulnerable group. It's a mirror reflecting widespread instability. The poor see no way out. The middle class fears an uncertain future, and the elderly are witnessing the loss of peace in their final years. The remaining question is, if a city once considered a dream destination has now become a symbol of instability, how many other communities across America will follow a similar path? Looking at Phoenix in 2025, many people ask, is there a real path to breaking the cycle of homelessness that keeps repeating? The current situation shows that simply clearing the camp, relocating, and promising a budget cannot bring about fundamental change. If you want to change, you need practical, long-term solutions that are implemented in a people-centered way. The first solution is to expand affordable housing. This is the most important foundation. When the rent for a one-bedroom apartment has exceeded $1,100 per month, while the minimum wage and retirement benefits have remained virtually unchanged, the risk of falling into homelessness is increasingly high. If the city focuses on developing affordable housing and directly subsidizing rent, especially for the elderly and single women, this pressure will be significantly reduced. Just a policy that keeps rent at 30% of income, instead of over 50%, could prevent thousands from ending up on the streets. But housing is just the beginning. The accompanying services are what truly determine sustainability. A temporary roof is not enough to change lives if people still lack identification documents, do not have access to healthcare, and do not receive basic financial guidance. Losing your ID means losing your right to exist within the system, so legal support to recover your documents must go hand in hand with housing. Additionally, community health services and job counseling can create a true safety net. A notable direction is the Housing First model, which was previously implemented in the state of Utah. Instead of requiring the homeless to prove their eligibility before entering the program, Housing First starts by providing stable housing, then integrates medical, psychological, and employment support. At one point, Utah reduced its homeless population by nearly half by adopting this approach. Although there were still many challenges afterward, the message was clear. When people have stable housing, they have a real opportunity to start over. Phoenix can absolutely learn from this model and adjust it to suit the local context. Additionally, public-private partnerships are also a key solution. Non-profit organizations, churches, local businesses, and major brands like Goodwill and Walmart all play a role in providing food, job training, and living assistance. If these resources are closely connected to the housing program, the homeless will have more than one way out. Instead of relying solely on the city budget, this broad collaboration model can spread community power and reduce the burden on the public system. Finally, a change in policy thinking is needed. The issue of homelessness cannot be viewed as simply making the streets look bad, and then only focusing on cleaning up. It's a humanitarian crisis where every statistic represents a fate. If we don't shift from suppression to supporting stability, the cycle of homelessness will continue to repeat like an endless Groundhog Day. Phoenix could choose to continue spinning in the familiar cycle, or try a different path, one that begins with the recognition that home is not just four walls, but the foundation of human dignity and the opportunity to live. Looking ahead, Phoenix seems to be at a difficult crossroads. If current trends continue, the city could face an even bleaker outlook than what is currently happening. Rapid population growth, soaring living costs, and a continued shortage of affordable housing will push more and more people out of the safety net. At that time, tent camps not only appeared in the center, but also gradually spread to residential areas, putting additional pressure on the entire community. The already strained healthcare and welfare systems will continue to bear additional burdens. The elderly have to wait longer for care, hospitals receive more emergency cases from the streets, and police and social workers are caught in an endless cycle of clearing and setting up camps. Even if the city budget increases, it will be difficult to compensate, and the ultimate burden will still fall on taxpayers. Meanwhile, Phoenix's image on the tourism and investment map will decline, making the economy, which is already heavily reliant on services, even more fragile. What's even more concerning is the division within the community. When the homeless are seen as a burden, when residents feel the city is no longer safe, mutual trust gradually fades. A society without cohesion will find it difficult to find common solutions. This is perhaps the most insidious but serious risk. A city that not only loses homes, but also loses faith in each other. However, the future isn't all doom and gloom. American history has proven that during the most critical periods, communities can find new directions. Phoenix still has a chance to change if it dares to shift its focus from surface-level treatment to addressing the root cause. Affordable housing, accompanying services, and collaboration between government, businesses, and the community can create a turning point. The only remaining question is, does society have the determination to make this a reality? Or will it continue to allow the cycle of despair to repeat for many more years? Phoenix today is a warning, but it could also be a test. If this city can find a way to break the cycle, it could become a model for the entire country. Otherwise, Phoenix will forever be remembered not for its bright sunshine, but for the rows of tents stretching out like a testament to a fading American dream. Phoenix in 2025 reflects a painful paradox. A wealthy nation where thousands still live in tents under the scorching southwestern sun. Soaring rents, stagnant minimum wages, and piecemeal benefits have stripped them of their homes and their faith. But even in the midst of crisis, hope remains. If the government invests in affordable housing, expands healthcare and legal support, and the community works together to share, thousands of people could rebuild their lives. Who knows? Phoenix might become a symbol of rebirth, light emerging from darkness. The views and analyses presented in the video are general, critical, and exploratory observations, and do not substitute for any legal, medical, or social advice. Viewers are encouraged to think independently, discuss, and consult multiple sources before making judgments or taking action. We respect the human rights, privacy, and dignity of every individual, especially the homeless, and are committed to not increasing discrimination or prejudice in any form.